Leah Wing, thank you so much for coming on this documentary, Can ODR Change the World? The Story and Promise of Online Dispute Resolution. So I've traveled all this way to meet you personally because I've talked to you over the years on Zoom, and now it's good to just be in person. So we're doing things a little backwards from what this is all about. But I'm taking this opportunity to just tell the world the story of ODR. And you, amongst a few other people, has been instrumental in dealing with this story. So why don't we start from the beginning, from your perspective about where did ODR come from, and then your involvement, especially when it came to the ethics and all the ethical questions. So can you discuss some of the ethical concerns that came up as ODR were developing that you were thinking about?
So first, can I just thank you for your passion and commitment to getting the story about ODR out there. Also, your podcast is instrumental in helping people who are new to thinking about technology and dispute resolution or want to be looking at the different angles of it, to connect them to people who have been thinking about it a lot, experimenting with it, innovating, and also trying to disseminate new ways to increase access to justice. So I want to thank you, and also thank you for traveling. Yeah. And I'm struck even by your very kind introduction that there's something different when we're in person, isn't there? Yeah. So we already have this relationship which is meaningful and has been enjoyable for a while now. And also it's special to be able to meet in person. Mm-hmm. And I think that speaks to the dilemmas and the opportunities that the field offers. Because when we can't meet face-to-face, when we would have to travel quite a distance or spend a lot of money or take a lot of time to do that, there are real missed opportunities. And so technology, even before the use of AI, has been incredibly useful. And also so many, and I understand that as someone who's been a mediator for many decades and a mediation trainer, I know there are many who feel face-to-face is where it's at. It's so important and so valuable. And I guess as an advocate of the application of technology to all forms of dispute resolution, whether it's inside a court or outside a court, I would say it does not completely replicate, but it does offer so much, and it also offers something different. So I hope those viewers that might be skeptical will be open, have their hearts and their minds open, and also bring their critical lens, because I see ethics as directly connected to what we can offer. It's not just around morality, it's also around practicality. So speaking to the question of how ethics is important to the field, I stop here and ask you to tell me the question again.
Yes, so the question is, can you go into the ethical concerns that as ODR was developing, you've been there since the very beginning?
Well, close to the beginning, yes.
Yes, well, when I saw that you were mediating since the early 90s, I was like, I was in middle school, so how's that possible? You look really young if you were mediating in the 90s. So ethical concerns were coming up even at that time. So why did they come up, and what were they?
So I think some of the concerns travel with dispute resolution processes when we add technology. So meaning they weren't born online, so to speak. And some of those are questions about repeat player bias, the benefit that comes from being very familiar with a type of technology when the other party may not be. And that's something that we have in an offline setting as well. We also have concerns regarding confidentiality. All of us who do face-to-face are very familiar with that. But when we add technology, there's a whole set of new dilemmas. And when we add AI, not just the use of email or just the use of video conferencing, we add generative AI as an example. We have additional concerns as well. I will probably speak about this several times as we have our conversation today, but I would say that we have both a new geography over the last 30 years, which is a place to meet, whether it's through text or through its video, but we also have new tools that we're using, right? And with the new tools come, I would argue, new dilemmas, but also it magnifies the opportunities as well, and I know we're going to talk about that shortly. So confidentiality, I think unequal access is an issue. whether it's unequal access to software, unequal access to familiarity with the technology, unequal access to broadband, just as an example. And so that is some of the dilemmas. The other is that one of the beautiful but also challenging things about dispute resolution is it's connected to all sectors of society, right? We handle disputes that occur in any aspect of society. And it is really an interdisciplinary field. So as we start to work more closely with software developers, computer engineers, other technology disciplines and technologists, we have the opportunity to share our knowledge about what is needed for a fair process procedurally and to create the avenues through which substantive justice and increased healing, increased understanding can occur. But those fields are not usually trained specifically to be thinking about the issues from our lens. And so some of the patterns about how people are trained as software engineers, for example, is to create something that will be as portable and replicable as possible. And that can be incredibly useful, and it also can mean that it's not context specific, and that, again, when we add AI, we have the concern where we're using incomplete data, inaccurate data. AI is generating false information, and it's being used to create the architecture for the way that we're handling disputes, as well as substantive information. So when mediators, arbitrators, or court personnel, attorneys, are using generative AI in order to look for previous cases, we all know that there's a high rate, unfortunately, of hallucinations still. But also, AI can be used to productively try to detect disputes prior to them blossoming. That can be incredibly helpful. It also can misidentify, or it could not capture disputes. And so I think that we will want to pay attention to the concern that we now have. As you know, technology is considered the fourth party in dispute resolution, and we now have a fifth party. And the fifth party are the software engineers and LLMs and their architects. And we need to see them as part of the ecosystem and the landscape and be thinking about the education and training they get, and also how it impacts us as we choose what systems to use, what technologies to use, and what their limitations are.
Yes, let me ask you this. When it comes to AI and ethics, I've heard you, or I've read that you describe something called a black box, right? The idea that AI can start helping us generate solutions, whether it's in a online court setting or in mediation, but in the process of generating a solution, a suggestion maybe for how people might be able to resolve their disputes, we, the humans, might get locked out of the process or the rationale that AI used to get to the information. How big of a concern is that?
So again, I would hold out this balance because I spent the last 25 plus years of my life paying attention to this, and I think that it has a lot to offer. But regarding the concerns, I think that technology and AI in particular magnifies the ability for bias, for inequality to be replicated, and to, because we're so invested in so many cultures in the power of the written word, that once something is generated and we've decided to trust what the machine has generated, so to speak, that it narrows, in many ways, it narrows what we're thinking. So I'm concerned that dispute resolvers will become more dependent on that rather than on their human ingenuity, or the ingenuity, if we think in mediation, the ingenuity and the creativity of the disputants themselves, the participants themselves. I also know that AI can deal with a tremendous, multitude of issues in a way and much faster than humans can. So it does have something to offer at the same time as it narrows and as it shrinks, as it generates suggestions and solutions for outcomes. We need to think about how it's been trained. What's the data that it's been trained on? So if we have data that comes from a particular universe of information, was that built on the literature that is multilingual, that's international, that comes from a variety of disciplines? If we think about just for example, if we think about the pathway to getting published, and it is designed purposefully to make sure that information that is produced in the academic arena has been properly vetted. But of course, there are arguments about how it also shrinks what the counter narratives are, as opposed to the more dominant narratives. And we have the issue of social media and the ability to capture information from a broader population that can include more narratives in the data collection, and that's exciting. And also, it is not vetted in the same way. So we hold out this balance, this tension between how data is collected, who decides what that data is, and then how it is designed and presented. And as a dispute resolver, we don't have expertise unless we train the next generation, both younger folks and also even professionals that are deciding to get trained in the use of technology, to be thinking about the ethical concerns so they can make the best decision for what software they'll use, what technology they use, when they use it, and very importantly, I would say, the conversations and the transparency we have with the people that we're working with so that they're informed. Because AI and the technology choices we make can shrink decision-making opportunities. And so when do we include the participants in that decision-making?
Gotcha. So let's talk about justice. So when you think about justice and you think about it in the context of ODR, how do you avoid the problems of injustice in ODR? Like, how do you deal with fairness? How do you avoid bias? Because if we're talking about technology, we are very dependent on the technology builders, platform builders. You mentioned developers earlier. So how important is justice in this whole entire conversation?
Wonderful question. As I said before, I think that it really increases access to justice to apply technology in so many settings. But we need to bring this lens for when it will actually create new injustice or procedural lack of fairness or an unequal improvement in the experience, and perhaps new experiences with injustice that aren't occurring offline. The other thing is I want to clarify my view of what ODR has become. At first, it really was, we're using the internet, we're using email. And then it became, now we're using video conferencing. And then it became the use of AI. So in many ways, well, quite clearly and frankly, I would say, any dispute resolution process that uses technology, the component in that process in which when we're using technology is ODR. So to be clear, I would say that probably the average dispute resolver is using ODR as at least part of their practice from between the beginning and the end, from referral and intake to follow-up. I think that what I like to think, the phrase that I often think in my mind is that no code, no justice. Yeah. So if we are not paying attention as a field to the coding and as I said, the capturing of information inside of what we use for AI in the large language models, if we're not paying attention to our participants and whether they have equal access to be able to participate, and also consider what the risks are. So I'll just say, for example, for someone who lives in a rural area where there is not strong broadband, then it can actually create an inequality that would not exist if they took the day off of work, found childcare, perhaps lost money by not going to work, and drove to the nearest city and went to their local mediation program. So in some ways, they're saving time and they're saving money, but they may not have as strong broadband, or they may not have any access to that. So as we as a dispute resolvers think this through, we can see that we're increasing access to justice, or we may be decreasing it or creating this inequality. I would also say that there's a way in which, because I do want to emphasize the benefits, because they're directly related to justice issues and fairness as well. Technology is incredible for helping us with translation. And so the ability to have multilinguality is incredibly useful. And it also puts a burden on the dispute resolver to be thinking through ways that they can harness the technology to create, rather than as a default assume we're using the main language of the mediator or the arbitrator, for example.
Okay. So regarding the phrase you just mentioned, no code, no justice, ultimately, what do you want people to know that phrase means to you?
I guess for those that are thinking about the field in general, their fingerprints, their input is very important. So people who are making decisions about the software that they're choosing for their practice, for the program that they run, when they're thinking about the certification and training of people on the rosters, for example, that they're considering how is the technology being used. And I think that we need to have a stronger input and communication with those that are creating the software that we want to use. So many of us reach and get, so to speak, off-the-shelf technology, video conferencing, or a platform that is not designed for dispute resolvers. And those creative innovators, and the numbers are growing tremendously, who have created online dispute resolution platforms specifically for our field, have been thinking through the lens of the ethics of our field. And as a result, they're thinking about coding as the fifth party for the design of the process that will be more fair for all of us. The other thing is I focus a lot on access to justice, and that's important, but I know many people use dispute resolution to increase understanding and healing. And so that phrase could be broadened to say we want access to processes that are healing as well.
Gotcha. So before I continue, when I was talking to Colin Rule in our talk, he focused a lot about scale and how ODR allowed parties to be able to take these a few disputes in eBay and scale them and help reduce. And now eBay deals with transactions in the millions. Mm-hmm. But do you think that there's a downside to just focusing on the raw numbers and trying to address as many disputes as possible? Is there a temptation, if that's the only thing we focus on, that might indirectly lead to harms or wrongs? Or should that just be the primary focus, which is just to address as many disputes as possible?
So I think that, again, there's probably different lenses, different perspectives in looking at that. For the business community, for the buyers and sellers, and for e-commerce, it is incredibly useful to be able to quickly have a transaction by having the trusted process of reputational feedback that eBay developed with the guidance of Colin, and now it's used all over the world. We're giving stars, positive feedback to those that promise a dispute resolution process or deliver on that and deliver a good service, and then why wouldn't people prefer to buy from them? So having high volume for low value disputes resolved effectively, quickly, there's a high satisfaction rate, and I can see the benefits for buyers and sellers. And of course, we lose the human touch. We did some early experiments with the idea of apology online and what people were expecting. And if you have a chat box, a chat bot apologize on behalf of a company, it is not valued in the way of hearing the voice or knowing that you're communicating with someone. So if you have had an enormous bill and it's taking you a very long time to resolve it, you may be just relieved that it's done and you get your money back. But for some, they're looking for that human touch. And that's why, if we think about it from the perspective of the different parts of our discipline, so to speak, or our practice, then technology can be the avenue through which we can have that human touch when it's needed. Not everyone's looking for that. And so I think that that's the beauty of being able to apply technology, but it's also the risk if we're only thinking that success means numbers.
Good job. With regards to AI, so when you envision the future, can you speak a little bit about the potential positives and negatives of AI's ever-growing integration into ODR?
Well, I think as we think short-term and long-term in the future, one of the things that's going to be incredibly helpful is that there's a generation that's been raised in the digital age.
Yeah.
And so they'll have a facileness. They will find it easy and kind of an assumption that they will use technology and integrate it, including increasingly the generation that'll be coming up after the generation that's already here, that they'll be so familiar with AI. And they will be probably more schooled, both on the personal level, but even in the formal education level, in thinking about the concerns and the ability to harness AI effectively. So I think there's a segment of the future that I'm very optimistic about. At the same time, I do think that it is magnifying and will continue to magnify inequality. It will magnify risks, and not equally. And so that is a particular concern of mine, is that all risks are not equal for all parties. And so I think that unless the field takes leadership, which it has really begun to do, regarding ethics and ethical standards and guidance and best practices, that we ought to be concerned about the impact of AI. The other thing is, I don't want to act like all AI is the same. Because we could be using AI for intakes, for our communication about setting up a case. We could use AI to help with scheduling, to help with a variety of administrative tasks. And that is not entirely without risk, but it is much different than using AI to, number one, narrow our options, as opposed to help expand our conversation about options. And the other is very concerning to me, and that is if we're going to be turning to AI for decision-making in either court or in arbitration.
Yeah. Well,
and I think we're headed in that direction. So that would be something that would keep me up at night, or is.
So, well, let's get to that question. So what concerns you, or what does keep you up at night when it comes to the ethics of ODR, especially because AI is expanding by leaps and bounds.
By leaps and bounds.
Yes.
So I think the lack of transparency about when it's used, how it's used, and I will not fault our field for that. I mean that we need to use the tools that are out there and consider which ones are best for us. Yeah. But if it starts to become embedded in our daily lives in ways that we're not even familiar with, will we be asking the questions about what part of this process or this software that I'm using uses AI, and how is it increasing access or how is it decreasing access? Where is the data that it's based on? Whose perspective is that data reflecting? And also, what are we going to do about hallucinations? So I would say right now, the percentage of hallucinations is quite high. At the same time, AI also offers instantaneously incredibly useful information. And when you receive all of that at the same time and you don't have a way to judge which is accurate and which is not, it is a challenge not just for our field, but for humanity. That's what I would say. And so that's what keeps me up at night. And I do think that good intentions and the market have not proven sufficient. Hopefully the market will still contribute to holding AI to higher standards, and certainly good intentions are valued. But I think that creating, again, an ecosystem of governance, that's I guess what I would say, is important, both inside our field and in the world at large, regarding standards, legislation, regulation, best practices, and guidance.
Yeah, so a perfect segue now to standards.
Yeah.
So I know you've written books about this. The most recent one is governing artificial intelligence. And when it comes to employing standards in ODR that will account for AI, can you give the viewers, first off, a little bit of a history lesson when it comes to standards? It sounds like a boring word. Whenever I think of standards, I think it's just a boring topic.
I'm hearing you.
But we take it for granted. I mean, we have standards in everything.
Yeah.
You go pump gas, and there's going to be, standards
That's
that tell you, whether you're using the right grade or not. Standards with regards to gold, standards with regards to vegetables. Okay, so when it comes to this, discussion about ODR, online dispute resolution around the world, what is the story of standards?
So let me distinguish that from guidance and principles for the purpose of our conversation. So guidance would be best practice suggestions, good ideas to follow. Principles would be perhaps what we might think as aspirational, and some of the words we may use overlap in all of those, but when we talk about a standard, we're actually talking about the basement.
Yeah.
We're talking about the floor of what's acceptable. We're also talking about something that we can hold people accountable to, right? And so I'm going to speak to that. I think all three levels are needed, besides regulation and legislation. I think all three levels are needed. So let me say that in 2009, as you well know, ODR got rocking and rolling in the late 90s when the internet went public. And then in 2009, the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution developed a first set of standards. And those standards, I'm excited to share, have been used by ICANN, which has been governing the internet since it became public. And so it had an impact kind of behind the scenes where most of us would not be familiar. And then in the mid-2000s, as the field began to grow more and more, the ODR subset of the field began to grow more and more, and we started to see more clearly some of the ethical dilemmas and, again, opportunities when technology is applied. More discussion started to occur in the field among those of us that were deeply engaged. And it was not just at the center. Of course, the EU was beginning to engage in that. Other organizations around the world, the UN, and you may be familiar, UNCITRAL, the UN Committee on Trade and International Trade Law, they began a approximately seven-year process of attempting to create ODR standards that would be accepted globally by the UN negotiations for high-volume, low-value disputes. They, in the end, were able to reach consensus on a one-page technical note. So they did not reach agreement on a set of standards. During that time, the center decided that it would be helpful to produce a document on principles. So we issued a document with 17 principles called Ethical Principles for Online Dispute Resolution in 2016, and they were, again, aspirational. And the goal was to think about the offline values and norms in the field of dispute resolution, pretty much accepted internationally around issues such as fairness and confidentiality, et cetera. And to hope to stimulate further conversation in the standards development, but also to help guide people who began to use technology, because each one of those principles was directly related to thinking about how to apply technology. And by 2017, we decided to take those principles and issue a set of standards. So the center has over 50 fellows from around the world that are early entrepreneurs, innovators, academics, and practitioners. And we engaged many the fellows at large and many others to contribute to narrowing the principles and turning them into this set base standards. We tried to make them thin enough that they could be applicable across different domains, for labor disputes, for environmental and public policy disputes, for family disputes, for arbitration, for mediation, and across different cultural settings. And then in 2017 as well, we also decided to create a membership organization that I hope people will be interested in joining, the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution, and to make that organization a standards-setting organization. I mentioned that because the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, began to consider that it wanted to look at the possibility of having ODR standards. And I'll come back to that story because iCoder participated in that process. So then in in 2021 and 2022, the National Center said there have been enough changes, particularly with the introduction of AI. We did not have publicly available generative AI yet, but there was introduction of AI that people were starting to use, and we said we need to incorporate that in the standards. So in May 2022, we issued a new set of standards that are basically the 2017 standards, but include AI. And then there we go. In 2022 fall, generative AI hit the public for free and really made a large impact. Of course, COVID also made this enormous impact starting in 20, when every dispute resolver worldwide had to jump in the mix. And so we were getting calls left and right to talk about the practicality, but also the ethical. How do I think about confidentiality when I'm using video conferencing? How do I know no one else is in the room? What do I think about privacy? And those types of issues. So getting back to closing the story where we're bringing it up to date where we are with standards today, ISO did almost 5-year process of beginning to negotiate with, and I will say ISO has at this point 175 countries, standards bodies as its members, and it's the organization that certifies sunglasses so that when you want to watch the eclipse and you need to make sure your eyes won't get burned, you get an ISO sunglasses. They do determination for seatbelts, so that if you buy a car in a different country, the seatbelts all have the same regulation. So it has a huge impact on economies and on ethics internationally. And ISO made the determination that it wanted to take the national centers and iCoders May 2022 ODR standards, and after several years of negotiating, they took it hook, line, and sinker. And so it is verbatim the same words as the standards with only one small change, and that is ISO is required to say should instead of must. Okay. And so otherwise they have made that an ISO standard 32122, and it was issued March 10th, 2025. Yeah. So that brings us up to date, and hopefully it will be useful. I can only imagine that as technology changes rapidly, we will need to continue to revisit standards and best practices.
Yes, also that was very succinct, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
I was in London when you guys were announcing that, hey, congratulations to NCTDR. ISO has basically adopted what we've been working on.
Yes, it was very exciting. It was daunting to be at the table to try to negotiate this, but it was also, it gives me hope and inspiration to see international collaboration reach success.
Awesome. Okay, so let's start wrapping up. The question that's being posed to all guests on this discussion is, can ODR change the world? I've wrestled with the question myself, actually. I'm still going through my own evolution on it. But what's your take? Can ODR change the world? Has it already? Will it? And will it change it in a negative way ethically? I want to get your thoughts to that question.
Thank you. I think it's already changed the world. And I think that's some concrete examples of that is the fact that the reputational feedback process is used worldwide. And while people think of it as customer service, it's dispute prevention and resolution, and it was designed from that lens. We now see video conferencing as a default option for connecting. We frankly are already, and have been before people thought of it as any form of technology-related dispute resolution, been exchanging documents using collaborative writing in order to, now using document share and storage boxes in the cloud. And so people might not think of that as ODR, but it's applying technology to our dispute resolution processes. And so I would argue that the average practitioner has already been changing the world with the way that they use technology, whether they think about it as ODR or not. I think it's going to continue. If we see how we were able to manage disputes during COVID, it shows that ODR has changed the world. I think it's going to continue to change the world for better and for worse.
Gotcha.
For all the reasons that I mentioned, I think just as in human nature, we will continue to struggle not just with bad actors, but with silos that are only thinking about, let me make something efficient, let me capture the data that's easiest to capture, and also, oh my goodness, here are these amazing tools that can help me connect people better, help them have more ingenuity and more creativity in resolving problems, and harness the skills that technology could offer us to help us see something that we might not have seen. The other thing I want to mention is, I think we have not harnessed the visual. So generative visualization in AI, I think, is going to be something that's coming around the bend to help us picture literally how we can imagine, let's say we're disputing over a landfill site or disputing over something else that has geographic impact. I think that visualization tools are going to be incredibly useful. We already can harness GIS for that. I think it's going to be incorporated more and more into dispute resolution in the future.
Yeah, well, thank you for that future vision. It makes me think of one of the concepts of mediation is meeting of the minds. Are we sure that the parties come to an understanding where they imagine the same thing? So like you said, if generative AI can literally give a fake video or something where both sides, multiple parties, can look at it and say, yes, that is what we're thinking. That does have the potential to help resolve cases in a way we never imagined before.
That is such an interesting way. I've never thought about that. But you know what it reminds me of? Why I think the partnership with humans is crucial. Because I can see that and I'll see something different than what you might see or someone else might see. And so we'll still need, I believe, or we'll still benefit from the humans asking, interpret this. When you see this and it looks good to you and that looks like the future that's okay to you, what are you seeing? Because we need to still get that narration, so to speak, of the interpretation to make sure we're seeing the same thing, even if we're looking at the same thing. So I think of it as a useful tool, but not in so many ways, in some ways, but not in many other ways, entirely replacing the human contribution, both as a third party and also as the disputants. I think that AI is in our future. And so it's a matter of managing it, using it, and protecting ourselves from it.
Okay, thank you so much. You've done a lot of thinking about this whole thing, especially from the perspective of ethics, more than most of us. And so I appreciate the time that you've given me today.
Thank you. Thank you for what you're doing. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. All right. I know we have to get on our... It's 2:30.
Yeah.
So we got about a few more minutes. I'd like to ask you a few more questions.
Okay.
I'm imagining documentary, and I'd like to capture a little bit about what we were talking about when we were at
Hampshire House.
Hampshire House.
This is Hampshire County.
Oh,
so
that helps. I just drove.
That's all right.
I saw
That's why
lots of signs.
there's a Northampton, an East Hampton, a Southampton, and a West Hampton. So the Hamp is a big thing around here.
Okay, so when people talk about the Hamptons, that's in New York.
Oh no, there's nothing like that
Exactly.
These are the small little towns in Massachusetts.
Well, I'm not from the Northeast, and
Okay.
this is my first time actually touching. I mean, I've been to New York before,
Okay.
but Vermont, Connecticut, never.
Okay.
I just see them on the map, and so now it's awesome to actually be here. All right, so a few questions.
Yeah.
These are pretty easy. I just need for you to kind of share what you remember. So, I guess I just want to know a little bit about your own personal story when you were a graduate student. That's when you started working with Ethan Cash. and Janet Rifkin.
That's right.
And that was at UMass, Amherst. Now,
Yes.
were you a student at the campus yourself?
Yes, I was in the School of Education.
Oh, okay.
It's now the College of Education, yes.
Okay.
And I was studying conflict resolution in organizations and issues of justice regarding that. Janet eventually became a committee member. She was a mentor of mine, and I TA'd in her classes, and then I met Ethan, and so I've been involved in the legal studies department since the early 90s. And then when they started experimenting with this, a very skeptical mediator, Leah, was willing to join in the mix and very curious about how they thought we were going to be able to handle disputes in this strange place called cyberspace.
So you don't have a technology background.
I don't have one at all.
But now you're deep into it. How did you ever imagine that you'd be doing this kind of work?
I could have put a bet down that I wouldn't have. I enjoy the face-to-face, the human touch, and also technology at that time did not interest me very much. Now I really wish I knew how to code. It may be something that I will learn to do in the future. I've been working with a number of people to develop a disaster response app for nurses, and really interested in, so I'm learning a little bit more about the behind the scenes of the technology. But no, I don't have a technology background at all. I'm bringing the lens of a dispute resolver to thinking about it. I would say, I think perhaps the very first time that a mediation process, I would say, because there are lots of different ways of mediating, but that a mediation process was mapped into code was through a National Science Foundation grant where we worked with Dan Rainey from the National Mediation Board and computer scientists, and Ethan, Alan Gatenby, who I mentioned before, and myself at UMass. And we had mediators from the National Mediation Board come in, and we discussed, and I mapped what they were saying, and then the coders ended up mapping, and they chose a particular part. As I mentioned earlier, having an aspect that can be replicable is very important. It's valued, of course, in computer science. So they chose the section where, especially in interest-based mediation, especially in labor mediation, where brainstorming happens. So we together, although the coders were doing it behind the scenes, really developed a tool we called Storm at that time, and we practiced it with the National Mediation Board mediators, and they actually continued to use it with actual disputes with arbitrators, and their arbitrators and their mediators handling railroad and airline disputes. Using the tool, one of the things we thought was very interesting is when there was an opportunity to use anonymity in making contributions to potential outcomes in mediation, when you had, let's say, 3 from labor and 3 from management on either side of the table, metaphorical table or sometimes literal table, that having a chance to contribute anonymous suggestions actually increased the amount of creativity. So for me, that really sparked my interest in this new idea of how using technology and anonymity could be very useful. And as I mentioned before, of course, anonymity can also give us an ability to cyberstalk or flame or be misunderstood. But that was kind of a beginning point for me in getting very interested in ethics.
Yes. How long have you been the director of the NCDDR?
So I was the dispute resolution director for a number of years, and then I think it was 2017 I became the director, and I think in 2009 I was the co-director with Ethan.
Okay. So is there anything that I didn't ask you that you would want to share?
No, you've been a fantastic partner in this conversation and interviewer.
Awesome.
Thank you very much. I'm honored that you asked me.
Thank you so much, for taking the time. I appreciate it. And for introducing me to your city.
Thanks for traveling here.
All right, let's stop.